All right, I think I'm going to get started. So I'm Isaac Zablocki. I'm Director of Film Programs at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I want to thank our two partnering divisions of the centers at the JCC who took part in this. First of all, our Center for Social Responsibility, who partnered in this. I'll also give a big shout out to our nursery school, who did a big part in, who were partners on this. And also, and this leads us to our moderator for this evening, our Center for Family Life. And Yael Kahnpinto is here with us and will be moderating this conversation. Thank you, Yael, and thank you for being a part. We love it when our different departments at the JCC overlap and combine and partner. And I'll hand things over to Yael in a moment. I'll just mention that if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. And then after the moderated part of this conversation, we will contact you and open your mic so you can ask your questions too, to our two fabulous guests who have joined us. First of all, we have the co-director of the film, Danny Alpert. Danny, thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing this wonderful film with us. Danny is an accomplished director, and his films have aired on HBO and PBS, and I feel like there's always a social element to some of your films, if that's a key connection.
Yes, it is.
But, we'll see. Okay, well, we'll let the questions go there. I don't want to overstep. And we're also very proud to have here one of the participants of the film. She is the featured preschool teacher, Rachel Giannini. Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us. And Rachel is a teacher, an early childhood specialist, and sometimes a video star, as it says on her website, rachelgiannini.com. I'm going to hand things over to Yael, and we'll come back when it's time to moderate the questions from the audience. So prepare your questions. You could start putting them in the chat whenever you're ready, but don't let it distract you from the important questions that Yael is going to ask. So over to you, Yael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isaac. I'm really thrilled that you asked me to be a part of this evening. My background is in early childhood. I have a master's in early childhood general and special ed. I spent almost a decade as a preschool teacher, mostly in the JCC's nursery school, teaching threes and pre-K. And now I'm really thrilled to be the director of the Center for Family Life, where I oversee all of our programs from prenatal through 18, but specifically focus on parenting and 0 through 4. And I also have 2 young children myself. I have a 5.5-year-old and 2.5-year-old. So this film was just so exciting for me, both to hear it get made and to see it make its rounds in the early childhood circle, because I think it's just so important. So I'll dive right into the questions. So Danny, this first question is for you. What was important to you about this topic and made you want to share this message? And really, how did you become aware of these issues? We hear a lot about both the lack of accessibility and the lack of quality in early childhood education. I think you did a really amazing job bringing that to the forefront. So I'm really curious, how did you get started in this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having us and for featuring the film. Really appreciate that. This journey for me began over about 20 years ago, actually, when my wife was pregnant with my first child, my daughter, Talia, who's going off to college in a couple of months. And I was I'd always wanted to be a parent, but I was very nervous, as most people are, about becoming one. And I was invited by a colleague to come visit a prenatal doula program, a community-based doula program on the west side of Chicago, and that worked particularly with teen moms. And it was that experience of that first encounter with prenatal care and prenatal interventions and the earliest days, the interventions in the earliest days that sort of began to open up my eyes to the realm of, the first 5 years and how important it is. I made a film about that program called A Doula Story for PBS. And through that, got to know a lot of the early childhood educators and advocates in Chicago, and started to do work over the next 20 years for a lot of those organizations, the Ounce of Prevention, the Irving Harris Foundation, the McCormick Foundation, the Educare programs. And slowly, as I started to move sort of up from the first days and hours of life into the first 5 years, it became increasingly aware of, on one hand, the importance of those first 5 years and just the formative experiences, but at the same time, how little the public knows about it and how much the public does see it as daycare, as babysitting, or, babies as sort of blank slates. And when we started looking around and realizing that the public was so misinformed, and that there really had not been a documentary that just sort of laid it out, A, B, C, D, and sort of really in an entertaining way, laid out the case for why early childhood is probably the most important long-term investment that we can make in the country and in our future population. It became clear that that was the next film, when we started this 5-6 years ago, that was the next film that we needed to make, and we were off to the races.
I think we're so lucky that you did that, because I agree. I think there's like a lot of academic literature about it, and there's articles being written, but I consider myself fairly well steeped in the universe, and I hadn't ever seen something that laid it out so clearly and so publicly accessible. So I think that's really a great service that you all did. And that leads me into a different question. Is I love the specific setup of the movie, showing, the architect without the blueprints, and all of you need the setup for the joke, and how many people don't really equate early childhood as the foundation or blueprint for success. So beyond showing everybody this film, it sounds like you're pretty well steeped in a lot of these foundations and their work. How can we work to change that perception?
The perception of
babysitting, as it's just, they're a blank slate that needs to be filled. Yeah,
well, I think that, when we started the film, I had a goal that the person leaving the theater and having seen the film, not so much in this moment, but gets to the crosswalk and sees a mother or a father and a 4-year-old child, and looks at that child in a different way. And I think that this is the kind of issue that's really going to be, my one of the co-directors, Greg, I steal his jokes all the time. It's very funny. And, he always says, he starts the Q&As after the film, when there were those, he always says, okay, who here has a child? Who here knows, somebody who has a child? Who here was a child? Right. And of course, moving through everybody has a connection to this issue. So of course, advocates and government officials and policies, and certainly educators and providers, early childhood providers, are going to lead the way. But it's the kind of issue that we all have that personal connection to. So it's something that if we can get people's attention, we can get them to pay attention, because all of us do have that personal conversation. And I'm sure Rachel, who's been communicating about this not only through the film but on her own, has her own ideas about this one. So I don't know.
I have ideas about a lot of things. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Danny did an incredible job, along with John and Greg, making this film, because as you said, it is super accessible. It is really accessible. You can have no baseline knowledge other than the fact that once upon a time you were a child, and you come out learning something, and it's really incredible. We were in California. It was part of the Choose Children tour. So I'm talking last year, early outs, the first time in a theater with popcorn and candy. And I was like, this is a real movie. And we did a Q&A, and this gentleman who came in off the street because he just wanted to see a documentary said, I didn't know this was a problem. And then all of a sudden, the power of No Small Matter actually finally hit me, that you can't fix a problem you don't know you have. And Danny did an incredible job of just making this so accessible that everyone can take up this cause of making early childhood education an issue, because it needs to be brought up.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So Rachel, thank you so much for jumping in. I'm actually really curious, in the process of putting this film together, how did the two of you connect and you come to feature Rachel's classroom?
That's a Danny question.
Yeah, so, you know, we very much wanted to have a feature one, really spend some quality time in one classroom. You know, Greg and John and I had all spent time shooting in early childhood classrooms over the years, and we know how hard it is for a camera crew to come in and, you know, not be, you know, everybody pointing up at the fluffy thing that's coming down and wanting to play with it and looking at the camera and, you know, all that. So we wanted to, right, exactly. So we wanted to spend some time, and we started looking around. And, you know, frankly, in Chicago, you know, it was important to us. One of the things that was always sort of something in our front of our eyes the entire time was to make a film that was accessible regardless of political leanings or ideologies, or what part of early childhood, which approach you ascribe to. And it's really hard to find a diverse, racially diverse, economically diverse classroom in Chicago. It's a very segregated city, and we did not want to be in a situation where, you know, we were in either you know, all African-American class and reinforcing stereotypes, or in a Latino class, or in a white, you know, we wanted to really have a mix, and it was really hard to find. And then all of a sudden somebody said to me, one of our advisors said, I had this student once, she's a pretty good teacher, and you should go check out her classroom. And of all places, the classroom was in Highland Park. Now, you guys are New Yorkers, so you wouldn't know, but Highland Park is the North Shore of Chicago. It's probably similar to Westchester, or it's a wealthy community, predominantly Jewish, not predominantly, but very, very Jewish. I happen to have grown up there myself. And I was shocked that this classroom would exist there. And we showed up and walked in, and it was like, you know, I was there for 5 minutes, and I was like, okay. Rachel probably had a different experience. She probably was like, get these people out of here. But but it was pretty clear that this was the classroom for us, just in terms of herself and the other teachers who were there, the administration, the kids, and just the openness. We were welcomed. You know, Mr. Danny was already, everybody knew Mr. Danny. All the kids knew Mr. Danny by the end of the day, and it was really a great match. Very lucky.
I mean,
Agreed.
I've seen a lot of teachers teach, and Rachel, it is clear that you have like that magic special sauce of being inquisitive and engaging and just emotionally in tune with what the children need. That's clear from just those small clips. So I'd really love to hear from you. How did you, I mean, it's also clearly your classroom is also touted kind of as this ideal model that's part of like this the military approach, and something that like hopefully could be replicated on a larger scale. I'm curious as to how that classroom was framed to you when you were brought in as a teacher, and if you feel like it's something that could be replicated.
Oh, totally. So it's a preschool for all classroom. So because it's an extraordinarily diverse classroom when it comes to social economic status, we have many children who would qualify for free or reduced lunch now. While it's in Highland Park, it happens to take care of two different cities, Highwood and Highland Park. So there's makes for an extremely diverse group of kids. And we use creative curriculum, which is great and it's wonderful. But I don't think I ever grew up. And there's something really amazing about play and the power of play. So my classroom was actually a place where we would use the children's interests to really dictate how we were going to insert all of those Illinois learning standards. And that seems extraordinarily daunting, but it's actually the most natural way of learning. And it really hones your skills as an educator to focus and look for those little moments and those ahas and what are they really interested in. And then you take all that information, you sit down with your amazing co-teachers and you plan out a week that may or may not ever happen. Because what if the next day they say, I actually like cows instead? And you're like, okay, that's great. It's totally replicable. You can replicate it really easily. It's one of those things that it takes a lot out of you. I have no problem saying that those were probably the best decade of my life of sleep. Like, you work so hard all day, but it's totally worth it, because when you have an entire group of children who are feeding off each other's ideas and are able to scaffold and learn from one another as well as a teacher, it's absolutely beautiful. And you know this, being in the classroom for so long, it just makes you want to come back again and again and again. So
it's actually, to me, that is the most exciting part of teaching, and the magic of early childhood is that you don't have to go in there with a pre-planned curriculum, but you could use their play to dictate the learning. And I think, again, like I said, throughout the document, it's so clear that you're a gifted educator. Really, one of the most upsetting pieces to me was to see that you were leaving the field mostly based on pay. I know when I was teaching full time, I was running a camp, I was tutoring 10 hours a week. I know very few teachers, specifically early childhood teachers, who don't have 2 or 3 jobs, just like multiple things to make one like baseline livable wage, honestly, especially when you're talking about being in bigger cities. So can you share a little bit about how you ultimately came to that decision, what you're up to now, and did you see that as a trend among your colleagues as well?
Yeah. First of all, in Illinois, the average turnover rate for preschool teachers is 2 years.
Wow.
You're in a school for about 2 years, and then you ultimately probably end up moving to a higher grade, an elementary grade, where you're paid 3 times what a preschool teacher's made, despite the fact that you're 6 months age difference. It's actually interesting. I love this story. Before Danny came into my classroom, Danny came in, would you say November, to just check it out?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, so it was around October, and I would get off work every day at 3:30. I would go to the bar and I would bartend until about midnight or 1 in the morning. And I was the opener, so I'd be back at school at 7 a.m. And I lived an hour away from school. And I remember one day I was driving to school and I was thinking about, like, do I have enough money to pay my rent this month? Do I have enough money to, like, can I take next weekend off for like turkey bingo that we're gonna do? And then I started thinking about all of those teachable moments that I've missed because I'm worried if I'm gonna make rent. All of those hugs that I was getting cued for that I probably didn't catch because I was tired. And then it really struck me that no child should ever have to sacrifice because their teacher is exhausted. And thinking about, there's not a lot of steps for educators to make more money. There's really not. Like, you have to have a higher ed degree. It doesn't matter that I have a bachelor's from an amazing school. It doesn't matter. I capped at $26,000 a year, and that was it. So it was this idea of like, okay, I have to go back. I have to go back if I want to do anything more. And I did, as you saw in the film. For total spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, I'm so sorry. I leave. And I went to school for museum exhibiting and really focused on this idea of museum education and the power of third spaces to also be a place of education. And I worked at the Chicago Children's Museum for about 4 years. And then No Small Matter became very, very popular. And I've had a really great opportunity for the last 6 or 7 months to travel and do webinars and workshops and connect with educators and hopefully advocate that no teacher should ever have to leave a classroom before they want to.
Yeah. And I'll make a plug for her. She's also started to do her own YouTube channel and her own content. She's got some great stuff out there. So definitely check it out. I wish I had a little piece of paper with your URL on it, but it's fun stuff, Danny. And really, great stuff for kids too.
That's amazing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think, though, that really highlights an important issue too. And I think many people don't realize, everybody knows that teachers are chronically underpaid, and they don't realize that specifically in the early childhood sector, it's even less. No matter if you have a bachelor's or a master's or an associate's or wherever you're coming from, you're right, like there's a cap, and it often doesn't equate a livable wage. And I think that that's a definitely a really tricky piece of the puzzle. Switching gears for a moment, I think one of the most interesting parts of the film is that we get to hear from such a range of experts. You know, there's the founder of the Harlem Children's Zone, former military personnel, and even the secretary at the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. I thought another powerful moment for me was when he powerfully stated that true criminal justice is investing in early childhood education. And that statement, juxtaposed by a jail that looks more state of the art than most early childhood classrooms we know, I thought was so powerful. So clearly there's funds and people, right, who understand these missed opportunities. Did you get a sense from anyone in the film what specific work they're doing to combat this issue that we might not have necessarily seen?
Are you talking about the specific issue of pay or funding?
Funding.
Yeah, well, everybody, you know, I think the big issue around the funding that people don't really talk about that I was aware of during the making of the film, but after the film was done and during this process of talking to people across the country about the film, there's a constant refrain around sort of like a circular firing squad of educational funding and the fight around educational funding. The pre-K people are fighting the K through 12 people who are, you know, trying to edge out the higher ed people who are, and is it 0 to 5 or 0 to 8 or the middle school and the high school? Everybody is just like, you know, so desperate for funding that, you know, people are like, you know, climbing over each other to get, you know, to what they need to stay in business and, you know, keep their doors open and provide the best kind of programming, the most quality programming that they can for their particular students, for their particular age groups. And I think that that's a really, it's an insidious and kind of unseen problem in education, is this idea that, you know, there shouldn't need to be that kind of competition. And I think, you know, for me, one of the most important parts of, you know, I think, you know, you talked about the question of criminal justice, you know, that scene with the guy from Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, his name is slipping my mind right now.
John Wetzel.
But thank you. He, he was really committed, and I remember having a long conversation with him about how he is, you know, trying to open people's eyes to this issue in Pennsylvania, and, you know, talk about reallocation of funds, you know, and you can connect that right now, what's going on the streets in terms of Black Lives Movement and the questions about, you know, what are we spending our money on and how are we spending our money? It's not that there's not the money to spend, it's a question of priorities. And the reason that this issue, one of the reasons that this issue has not gotten funding is because it hasn't been seen as a priority. Oh, it's not as important as national security, or it's not as important as whatever the issue du jour happens to be. It's not always sort of pushed down, and people don't see it as sort of like a mental health issue, a public health, a long-term education, a workforce development, a criminal justice, health, you know, all the ripple effects. And I think that that was another thing that we really wanted to make clear from the film, was how this, you know, there are very few issues, that if you address one issue, the ripple effects into all these other issues is so powerful. And that, you know, it does, you know, ripple across many other issues that people do see as more pressing. Seems like a good investment to me.
Yeah, I think it's for people who aren't so familiar to see in the film how it just crosses into so many sectors and can be so impactful on a child's life and their future outcome. It's, you know, you'd be hard pressed to find a reason really not to fund it. So I will ask one more question before I turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So given this new reality that we're all in, we're spending more time in our homes, and knowing, as the movie says, everyday back and forth interactions with loving and supporting adults plays a huge role in optimal child development. What advice can both of you share for those who are home with their young children based on what you learned from this film or your own personal experience? And what can we do to support our children's teachers until more systemic changes can take place? was a two-parter, sorry.
I can say, first of all, I don't know if there's any other educators on the panel or on our Zoom tonight.
I see a few.
Okay, great. Thank you for all you're doing massively. And none of this is easy and it's so difficult. I will definitely have to say to any parent out there who is wondering, am I doing this right? I have had so many people come up to me and talk to me about this, and I say, you didn't go to school to be a teacher. You went to school for something else. You have focused your life on something else. Don't beat yourself up that you cannot also do this to what you think is the highest level, because you know what? As No Small Matter says, you are your child's first and best teacher. You are their model. They're aspirational creatures, and you are their biggest inspiration. So right now, taking this opportunity to spend time with your child and to read to them, I cannot stress this enough, read to your kid. You're not going anywhere tomorrow. They want a second book, read a second book. And letting them play and asking them really thoughtful questions and finding out who they are is going to actually make coming out of this a very different world. And so any parent who's like, my child's going to be behind, they're not going to get there, like, don't worry about it. We went to school for this. We know how to teach them. And in the fall or the winter or the spring next year, we will get them where they need to be. Just right now, focus on loving them and supporting them and answering their questions and just being there for them socially and emotionally.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump back in. Oh, sorry, Danny, did you want to answer that?
No, I got nothing to add to that. That's for sure. Silver linings.
In which case, I'm going to jump back in to bring in some questions from the audience. I just want to thank you all for making this conversation so engaging. And I'll note that if you want to share this with other friends, first of all, you should tell all your friends about this movie. Everybody should be seeing this. It's available. You could stream it. People are home. They take a break from Netflix and should be watching this film, and they should be doing it this week through the JCC link. So that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think and I would add to Rachel, that's right for Rachel's comment. It's, some of the most rewarding feedback we've gotten in the last couple of weeks is about, that this is really is a film for parents, and that watching this, film can help you reorient and sort of see, reorient your interaction with your kids around that quality, attentiveness and back and forth, serve and return, and inquiry and listening. So we hope the parents will definitely take advantage of that.
And then they could watch this conversation on YouTube and hear all of your wonderful questions that you're about to ask. And we're going to start with Sarah Lincoln. Sarah, you're on the air. Sarah, is your mic on? Okay, we can't.
Hi, I'm sorry, I just got off my mic. Cool, thank you. Here, wait, I'm just gonna go. Can you hear me?
We hear you well.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was just putting in a lot of questions. So, which question am I going to ask, or does it matter?
You ask what's of most interest to you.
Okay, so I can tell you, I'm a teacher, and our school, we go from age 2 to middle school, and I live in Vermont, and for the COVID stuff, our state, I guess, is doing pretty well, maybe, but we're planning on opening in the fall. And right now we're doing sort of lots of like going to school without, with the teachers socially, physically distancing, and just thinking about how I work with the almost kindergartners, so the 3, 4, and 5s, and just the reality of how like we're being asked to take care of them, and just the trauma of that, and sort of like the push to get the schools open. And I understand that's a community thing, but then this like unknown of like, okay, but all these kids are, just the sort of like, okay, and then we're going to close again, and we're nature-based. So anyway, thoughts about that, I guess. And then I guess tie into the whole I've been looking into abolitionist teachings, and I don't really know much about it, but just kind of wondering about that kind of stuff. So I'll take mine off mute.
Sarah, thank you so much. And the one thing, this is an even platform for everybody. Nobody knows what to do. Like, if you think about that, like, this is an even playing field. And the best thing that you have, though, is a community around you who also doesn't know what to do. But they're a great place that you can bounce ideas off of, and you can strengthen your ideas of teaching and working together. The fact that you're in a nature-based school now is fantastic. I personally think that's the way to go when talking about opening up and what does it look like to have children play outside, you know, because that's the most natural thing in the world. And really letting them explore through nature, hands-on experiences is by far I will have a soapbox all day for that. But when it comes to going back to school, yeah, social distancing with a child. What does that look like? Having them keep a mask on all day. Really? Like, there's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. But again, I can just suggest when it comes to this, taking this opportunity while you're going to school without the children to really connect with those other educators and making a game plan, and also reaching out to your administrators, asking them, like, let's, like, brass tacks, real, like, what are we going to do? Because the really nice thing is, like I mentioned, we're all on the same playing field right now. So we got to help each other out.
Deborah, we have a question from Deborah Cohn. Deborah, would you like to ask?
I'm not allowed. Okay. I as someone who is a single parent with 2 kids in daycare 40 years ago, I mean, it was a great experience. The only bad experience for me was going off welfare and working full time lost me $400 in benefits a month. Now, in the 40 years, that hasn't changed. So it's still a rough go for daycare, and especially quality daycare. But I was particularly impressed with the Advance program, and I wanted to know if it was being replicated around the country. Because to help the parents become better parents and to help them with their English, parenting skills, and possibly GED was amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Avance is a national program, and it is there are I don't remember the number, but there are a number of Avance programs across the country. And there are a lot of organizations who are working on these two-generation programs. There's a lot of interest and a lot of, as it says in the film, a lot of understanding the fact that, you know, children are not just children. They don't just exist on their own. They exist in an ecosystem, in a family, and that, you know, you can't have quality experiences in the classroom, and there aren't enough of those, and then come home to you know, adverse circumstances, poverty, lack of nutrition, whatever it may be, that you need to address both generations here in order to break the cycle, which is what you're talking about. So there are a lot of organizations who are working on that. Actually, Avance is working, I believe, with a Head Start on some interesting programs in that area. I know that the folks at the Aspen Institute and on a number of the foundations who funded the film are particularly interested in and exploring all kinds of programs. If you are, we're interested. You know, just you know, most of the field calls it the two-generation programs. So you could you know, look that up in that. And Rachel, anything to add to that?
No, I sincerely wish I actually had the opportunity of teaching in a two-generation program, because the Avance is incredible. The work that they do is unbelievable. We were actually at a screening in Omaha where this woman, I mean, we all cry at the film multiple times, but this woman is very emotional during this one part. And she, at the end, she raised her hand. She goes, I went to Avance. And she's a teacher now in Omaha. And it really just goes to show how incredible that program is. So yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Nancy Sugarman. Nancy, you're unmuted.
Thank you for letting me ask my question. First of all, I just want to say, Rahel, what a wonderful teacher you are. It was such a joy to see such quality teaching by you and your team. It was just, I need to teach this in my college courses and see what it looks like. I'm an early educator who's retired. I've been in the field for a very long time. And I've seen many, many films about early childhood and what a mess it is in this country. I have not seen much change, but many films that deal with the economic issue, the brain development issues, et cetera. And I'm wondering, and NEAYC and 0 to 3 and a number of professional national organizations have been trying to address advocacy for this funding issue. And because early childhood is uniquely addressing parents and their ability to fund it, and the low wage that early childhood educators make, it's very different from public schools. So given that big introduction, what are your thoughts about, given this current time and the squish of childcare in terms of how we can change the economy only if quality childcare especially, is available to parents? How could we use this film or these ideas that are in this film to actually, maybe this is a moment to move some of the early childhood advocacy and funding forward?
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail on the head, that this is a moment. This is a moment for a number of issues, but for early childhood, the two movements, the two tectonic moments that our country is facing right now, both in terms of the struggle for justice and reframing, of all of the Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID-19 pandemic, at the same time, from different perspectives, really are coming at this issue. From the pandemic's perspective, it's causing a huge amount of job loss. Huge numbers of centers are closing, are not making it through. There's going to be a great shortage in slots, as we move forward. As we were talking about a minute ago, it's untenable to think about social distancing and masks all day and having an early childhood classroom that functions and is safe, so to speak. Parents are nervous about sending their children back, as they well should be. It's a moment, but on the other hand, the economy, cannot, really begin to work until, if parents can't take their, have support, then they're not going to be able to go back to work completely, especially, again, and then the issues exacerbated from a racial and socioeconomic perspective, because of course, white collar workers, it's much easier for them to, stay home with their kids than blue collar workers or low wage workers. So all of these things are coming together, and it does feel that this is a moment where something's going to have to give. And I do know that the folks at NYC and NACI and all of those other organizations that are working on the Hill are working with not to be partisan, but working with Democratic leaders to formulate plans and legislation for funding for early childhood. There's been some talk that what's left over from the PPP program, maybe some of that might be invested in it. And if it doesn't happen in the next 6 months, then God willing, it'll happen after that. But I do know that there is an understanding right now that this is not, the kind of issue that can't be put off. That together, with healthcare, childcare is, a huge expense and a huge barrier for so many families in America that, moving forward, it's going to have to find a solution. So, I think sharing in terms of what the film has been doing, I think it has the early childhood community and educators around the country. That's been really rewarding to see. We've had a lot of state house screenings. We've screened at the Capitol 3 times, and we've had, last week there were, we've had a lot of input from legislators and policymakers. So people are using the film to advocate, which we're very excited about. And at the same time, I think, now is the time to really sort of hold our representatives to account. And we're trying to get as many of those representatives to see the film, senators, congressmen, governors, and lieutenant governors, etc. So please share the link with your elected officials and try and get them to see it as well.
Just to dovetail, I'm so sorry. I was just going to dovetail off Danny's. Recently, I've done a lot of AUIC affiliate screenings, and all of them are working very closely, as Danny said, with their state and local legislators to not only have them do viewings and see the screen themselves, but also at the same time, like, make a budget for going into next year, which has been incredible because, I mean, it took a pandemic for us to go from babysitters to essential workers. Like, we haven't had a place at this table ever. And the fact that, like, every hashtag of, like, pay a teacher more, thank a teacher, that was always on the fringe, like, influencers and night show hosts and everybody use it every day. So we actually have a spotlight and we're at the big kids table. Like, make your voice heard, like, use that big outside voice for advocacy right now. So sincerely, as Danny said, like, share this link out, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. And there's a lot of people running for election. Yeah.
Local.
Totally.
All
Exactly.
politics is local. And that's where the budgets are often made.
Yep, exactly. And there's a lot, like, you have to think about it. It's 2020. There's an election coming up, and there's a lot of people running on that platform of early childhood. They're saying it's part of something that they want to do. Well, what are you going to do? And especially now, there's a sense of urgency. Let's get them on the books and let's hold their feet to the fire.
I love it. I love it when there's a real call to action. We're going to take one last question from Renee. Renee, you're on.
You can hear me now?
I could hear you, but softly, if you could speak up a little.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Danny, for the film. It was really, really wonderful. I'm a grandparent, and it brought up many, many things in the past, and also the things that you hope for in the future. It really gave, I think, the opportunity for equality when we're talking about equality for all sorts of organizations. This early childhood people education really gives that opportunity. My question to you is, when did you decide that you wanted to do education through film? What happened in your life that you wanted to do that?
All right, that's a tough one. I would say that before I became a filmmaker, I thought about 2 other professions. First, I was going to be, as a young man, I thought about being a rabbi, and I realized at a certain point that I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I didn't want to be in public in that kind of a way, working in public and being held to that kind of public account and scrutiny all the time. And I moved on from there. And then afterwards, I thought about being a teacher. And I was actually signed up at university to become a history teacher. And so that was always there. And then finally, I thought at a certain point to become a therapist. And I realized that, my wife is a therapist, and we often talk about the similarities. I think that my job today sort of is a mix of all 3 of those professions, using the sort of the pulpit to draw people's attention to important issues, and trying to get them to understand perhaps a little bit more deeply. And the process is probably the most closest to being a therapist, where I come back to Rachel and ask her the same questions over and over again. and you know, to the people in the film, and you know, asking them the questions and trying to get them to think about and express their own experiences. And so I think that it's probably a combination of all of those things. When I did decide to go into documentary filmmaking, you know, the reason I did that was because it's a way to really get people to think about and see things differently, and to get them to perhaps take some action. So it was always pretty clear to me that as soon as I chose the documentary field, that I would be doing social issue documentaries and focusing on impact and engagement and social change.
Let me throw that to Rachel too. Rachel, when did you decide you wanted to be a teacher?
I was in college for something else. I was going to become a sign language interpreter. I grew up in the Chicago public school system, so it was like rows, worksheets, working by yourself, and I hated school, despised it. But I was in school, like in class one day, I totally forgot to take a philosophy class, and I took philosophy of education because I thought, they're kids, how hard can this possibly be? I'm gonna get an A. and on the very first day, my teacher came in and said the 5 words that literally changed my life. She said, children learn best through play. And everything in the universe just aligned in that moment. And it was like, okay, I'm so sorry. Are you telling me that if I become a teacher, I can play forever? And basically that was it. I changed my major that day. I really just took a deep dive into being in the classroom, because I truly do believe that, I mean, we know this. There's a very finite amount of time to set this brain into motion, and to be able to be there and in a way that I think is completely developmentally appropriate, and it happens to be so much fun and so natural. I mean, it's incredible. And I wish I could be back there a lot.
So I want to hand it back to Yael for to close things off, but I'll also tell you, in case she doesn't say enough about her own program, of course, check out all the fabulous programs at the JCC, and I'll mention our upcoming films in July. We put up our whole listings, and we're honoring the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and are showing some films from our ReelAbilities Film Festival. We're going to be having 3 presentations throughout the month, in addition to 2 runs of other new great films that are coming out virtually. And I know Yael has many fantastic virtual programs, and the programs at the JCC for my children who go there are fantastic. So Yael, over to you.
Sure. I just wanted to say first just how grateful I am to both of you, and to have this opportunity to talk with you. I thought it was such an impactful film. I can't wait both to use it on the advocacy side to really utilize this new place at the table, and also just as a professional development tool. You know, it's people enter teaching because they have that spark, but to be able to see a film like this that really reinforces the work that they're doing, especially when I supervise teachers of such young kids, I think it's really such a valuable tool to be utilized in that way too. So just thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for putting it together. I'm so grateful. And, you know, for children who want engaging experiences, we know that Zoom doesn't translate the best for young children, but we're doing the best we can to, you know, do it developmentally, in a developmentally appropriate way. We're having classes, we're having small group classes for young children over the summer with some of our really like star educators in groups of, you know, 3 to 5 to really help foster those connections as best we can, virtual multiple times a week. So I urge you to check that out as well. And just thank you so much for this opportunity, Isaac, and for Rachel and Danny for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yael. I also, once again, want to thank our folks at the JCC Nursery School for being a part of this. And please do check out the Nursery School program as well. And of course, our social justice program, our Center for Social Justice, is extremely active these days. So be sure to follow them as well. Thank you all for joining us. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
Listen, see
Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yael, for leading this.
My pleasure. Have a great night.
Tell your friends to watch this film.